Okay, thank you for coming, and thank you for CATV for having me here. And yeah, there's one more seat here, so you can step in, and I'm starting. So we'll be having an artist talk about myself. My name is Eran Hadas, and my wife, my wife gave me the inspiration for the following poem, which I wrote back in 2013, The State of Poetry. When you brag about me, you never say my boyfriend is a poet. You say my boyfriend builds robots. And that's the thing about me. I do two things. I can do two things. One of them is writing poetry, and the other one is dealing with computers. I studied computer science, and I can write code. And I had undergone a certain process in my life which led me to combine the two things. That's the special thing about me, I guess. And as a poet, a normal poet writing manually poems, I became involved in some activism, and I was a member of a group called Cultural Guerrilla in Israel. I'm from Tel Aviv originally. And the movement tried to bring poetry to places that needed their voice to be heard. And if there's a large group of poets, media comes and it makes noise. So the idea was to harness poetry for the sake of social and political causes. And a couple of the activities that I helped to arrange or produce are shown here. The first one is Yes to Poetry, No to Walls, which is a poets' demonstration in front of the Abu Dis Wall, which is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem between Israel and Palestine. And this was a demonstration in which poets, both from the Palestinian and the Israeli side, came to say, we don't want walls, we want connection, we want to be together and create together. And then something happened regarding the activities I did when we were contacted by some hacktivists, activists that dealt with computers and data, and they were saying that there's an attempt to generate a database of biometric data of the people in Israel so that the government has the biometric data of everyone. And then if you find the DNA of someone on a crime scene or just on the street, then they can figure out who this person is, which has a lot of negative sides to it, but the story was that no one of the poets was willing to deal with that because they said it's too complicated. It's computers, it's not poetry. We don't deal with that. We want to be close to nature. And I thought that this is my time to step in because I didn't want to leave the area of computers to people who are not poetic or people who deal with business or politicians. I wanted to have the activists involved in that, even when we are poets. So I was the only one that was willing to head this demonstration against the biometric database. And so this is another activity that I was involved in and I helped to produce. And this really changed my perspective. I thought that technology should not just be used to create things that are not poetic. In Israel, for instance, technology is usually dealt within military needs or in high-tech companies where people make money or arms with computers. And I thought that it would be a good step to use technology in order to give voices to people to help democratize technological processes and to use technology in good ways and not just in bad ways, and in order not to leave the stage only for the right or the military or the financial markets. So a couple of things I tried to do is use technology to help people in a direct fashion. For instance, Greek artist Ilan Manuach has this system that he built called Shape Reader, which is a language that is built using those black boards where some forms and structures and patterns are embedded into those boards, and people can use them in order to generate stories or poems. And in this case, we did a workshop. Karen Katz and myself had this workshop in the Binyamin Gallery, where people came and used this technology in order to generate stories and poems and comics that are meant for blind people. So you can see that there are blind and non-blind people all covering their eyes in order to not see and form creations without using their eyesight, but just by using the patterns and the way that they feel, and create a tactile language, a tactile experience that is not just using what they feel, but also tries to give content according to the form of those structures and patterns. And this is what poetry is for me, making meaning out of form, not just out of direct content. Another project that I did was helping Tammy Asulin, who is a deaf poet, and she cannot hear, but she wants to write poetry, and she wrote a book in the language of Fa. Fa is a colloquial language for people who use sign language. But it's like sign language spoken in a way. And when she wants to present her poems, it was one thing to see them on page when it looks like a language, like slang. But it's another thing to see her making the signs with her movements, and it looks halfway between sign language and dance. So she moves freely and she creates more than just the text. She gives additional form and additional gestures to the signs. And what I helped her to do is working on a book, which is a video book. And besides, you can see in the background a lot of texts that are related to the concepts that she's trying to convey using Fa or sign language in her way. So in this way, we can see that, or I could see that technology can help, really physically help people to express their voice, which in other ways could not have been heard. But what I do most with poetry and technology is trying to generate poetry using computer code. Instead of just writing the poems, I write the software that in turn generates the text. And I have been part of an effort that became a bit viral. It was part of the Sweaty Machine project, and it's generated song, which I contributed the software that generated the lyrics, and it's called Blue Jeans and Bloody Tears. And the thing about this song is that it consists of it generates the text and music according to the Eurovision songs. The Eurovision is a competition that takes place in Europe every year, and it's a big thing in Europe where each country sends their own song, and it's kind of related to the LGBTQ+ community. and there are a lot of fans of the Eurovision. And the thing about this competition is that the poems are kind of lightweight, and we tried to create something funny that will resemble the songs of the competition, but without doing it manually, but by giving artificial intelligence to do the job. So we fed a lot of lyrics. I did a part of the text and generated a text that should resemble them according to an artificial intelligence model. And the same was done for the music. And let's hear part of an excerpt of the result, Blue Jeans and Bloody Tears by Sweaty Machines. Oops.
Have wet eyes that cry, but I'll survive on the mission. I will let you go forever. Blue jeans and bloody tears, blue jeans and bloody tears. There's no life without your life in misery. Blue jeans and bloody tears.
It became popular and won some awards, but the funny thing about it is that it's really kind of stupid. It's unintelligent, intelligent, artificial intelligent. And the thing is that you can see that even the title, Blue Jeans and Bloody Tears, was taken from two different songs that participated in the competition, Blue Jeans and Blue Suede Shoes, from an Ireland entry.
Jerry Lee was big in Elvis too. Blue jeans and blue suede shoes.
And the other part is taken from a translation from an Israeli entry. Bloody Tears. And the most liked on YouTube, at least, most liked line was tears will always have wet eyes. So you can see that this line was chopped out of 4 different songs and perhaps even more, but these are the most similar lines to this line. Of course, that because of copyright issues, most of the work was done in front of lawyers, and it was inspected by lawyers in order to see that we don't take too much from original songs. And what I thought when starting to generate poems is that I can step out of the page and use technology not just to generate text, but to think of poetic implementations of artistic or text-based artistic efforts or projects. So an example that this was the inspiration for the poem about building robots is a collaboration with Mayan Shelef and Gal Eshel in 2013 called Frankie the Documentarian Robot. We often hear about the Turing test in the last couple of years, asking when will a computer become indistinctive from humans, where a computer does something and we cannot tell whether it's a computer or a human performing this action. And what we try to do is a reversed Turing test, which is asking people what it means for them to be human, but we are not the ones who are asking, but rather we built a robot to do that. And Frankie the robot asks the people what humanity is for them, and according to their answers, she asks the next question. So let's see an excerpt from the interviews that Frankie conducted.
Hi, I am Frankie. I am a robot, and I am trying to figure out what it means to be human. Can you tell me about yourself?
I'm Rana. I'm a human. I'm a woman. And I would love to be part robot.
What's it like to be human?
It's actually pretty tough, but I don't know what the other possibilities are, so it's hard to compare.
What makes someone or something human?
If they can think for themselves without having someone printing their thoughts in them.
What does it mean to have a personality?
A personality is a set of rules you live by. Something like you, like a program, only with much more variety and more shades of gray.
What is human in your opinion?
Maybe to be able to look in someone's eyes and not say anything but still communicate.
What do you see in me?
There's no you. There's no you. You are an object. There's no me also. We are two machines looking one in front of the other.
I see in whatever you are something that I don't trust.
What do you think I see in you?
I have no idea, just another number. 01100.
Some cells that respond according to some algorithms, but you're probably trying to find how these algorithms mutate with compared to all your previous interviewers. That's my guess.
You see some information and you gather little pieces of things, and in the reality world you don't get much, but in my inner world you really get me.
I think you don't see me. Do you see me?
Please tell me about your dreams.
My dreams? I dreamt that I was sleeping with a girl.
What makes you feel envy?
Actually, when I see two people that really love each other, sometimes that makes me feel envy.
What make you happier?
I think if I find someone I love and he loves me back.
What is love?
Love is a chemical reaction triggered in the brain and affects other areas of the body.
Can you explain to me how love feels?
Some say it's like a warm, cuddly sleeping bag. Some say it's like a slap in the face.
Okay, so moving on from this, I always wanted to turn somewhat into gaming. I'm also teaching game development, but I always want to make it text-based. And this project is called Wikiland. It's about Wikipedia edit wars. You know that in Wikipedia, the website, which is the encyclopedia, the free encyclopedia, which is the history book of our time, we can only have one entry displayed as current at a specific point in time. For instance, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you can't have an Israeli narrative against a Palestinian narrative. It has to be like the objective one, although we know that in such situations there is no objective narrative. So we can see on Wikipedia, on the website, that there's the history of changes. We can see there that sometimes there are wiki wars, there are edit wars. People are trying to push their revision to be the current, while others try to remove it. So we follow those. It's a project by the Turing Dames. It's a troop or a group that I'm a member of, and we tried to follow those interesting wars and to turn them into a physical video game where people actually push each other to the center in order to catch the mainstream and get their vision through. So let's see a video of that. It's in Hebrew, but it's about whether Judea and Samaria were occupied or were just moved into Israeli hands. Whoops.
Wikiland is an arena for physical Wikipedia edit wars. Anyone can edit any entry on Wikipedia, and an edit war occurs when editors who disagree about the content of a page repeatedly override each other's contributions, rather than trying to resolve the disagreement through discussion. Such wiki wars are projected on a screen, forcing the people who stand in front of it to become engaged in fighting for the right revision. A sensor detects the viewers, assigns them to one of two teams according to their position, and attaches a chat bubble to each team, holding one of two competing revisions of the same Wikipedia entry. The bubble moves according to the movement of its team members, whose goal is to convey their story to the center and push away the other team. Each team scores points by capturing the center, by picking wiki candies, and eventually one team wins, causing its revision to be updated on the real Wikipedia site. Wikiland debuted at the Print Screen Festival 2014, Holon, Israel, and was made possible and funded by the New Fund for Cinema and TV, NFCT Israel. Wikiland is a project by the Turing Dames.
So what it says in the end is that the winning side got to update the real Wikipedia entry, which means that the virtual world, which is physical, is updating the real world, which is virtual. And of course, we got blacklisted by Wikipedia because we were trying to update those entries, and they were locked, and you cannot update them anymore at all, not just us. At this point in time, some members of the audience always say, but why are you doing that? Why not just write your poems? What kick does it give you to use computers to do that? And first of all, I just like it, but I think I have a more profound explanation, which I would like to share with you now. And I'm going to start this short explanation by a quote from poet William Carlos Williams, that a poem is a small or large machine made of words. So the way I interpret this sentence is that any poem or any work of art creates a world of its own. When I write a poem by hand, manually, then I create a text, but the text creates a world. It may be the real world or aspects of it, but it may be an imaginary, a fantasy world. And my role is to be the guy who generates the machine that generates the world. And many poets see their work as such. Maybe they would phrase it not using the word machine, but it's basically this kind of line of thinking. But here I'm given a quote that was translated from French to Hebrew to English that philosopher Jacques Derrida wrote about a poet he really loved and I really loved called Paul Celan. And he said, no one can attribute language to themselves, but he did all he could to face it and fight it. So language, that is the material from which we build the machine that creates the world, is not just a thing that is there. It's not just an innocent material. It's something that we have to face and we have to fight. American poet Robert Grenier said, when something is said, it comes into being. So saying some text creates some reality that is related to the text, that it's not independent of that text. And if you know Abracadabra, which is a great coffee in Vermont, Abracadabra is basically from the origin of this word is in Hebrew or Aramaic, but it means that I will create as I speak, which means that speaking is what generates reality, the real reality. So if we are working inside language, we're in some way captivated or incited or bounded by language, then the world that is created by those texts will find a hard time to break free out of what the text enables us. So if the person is inside the text, that's basically what Derrida said, then nothing that the person can create using this language, using this text, can step outside the world that the text enables. So language is known as an obstacle to communication because we cannot express everything we want, only what language permits. And poetry implies struggling against the language. And if the language generates only enables only a certain domain of creation, then we should be looking for the hidden parts of this domain and try to search for its borders and limits. And so in the last couple of years, or like 50 years, there's this literary challenge to fulfill the potential that is hidden inside the language. So the model that I'm suggesting is that the poet is using the computer to generate the text, and then the computer generates the text, and the text generates the world. So there's a certain degree of separation. It's not me inside the text. There is the computer to stand between me and the text, and in this way, language is expressed with me tweaking it and influencing it, but I can get the language to say some things, and I can detach myself from the language and not be bound by what language tells me that I think, what I think that I think, what I feel that I feel, but it creates its own constructions or constructs, and I'm affecting them. And in this way, I feel I would like it to be a way to democratize poetry in the sense that if I'm not bound to what I'm expressing through language, then everyone can get something else from what the poem brings out. So it can create the potential for various readings of the same text or of the same parts of language, where I am not in the center of them in the same way that a normal manual poem will be. So this is the profound answer that I'm thinking about when people ask me why I do that. But the shorter answer is, it just feels cool. I just like it. And specifically, if I try to take it to the level of feelings, for me, this is the lyric part of it, where I let everyone see the result of what the computer generated. It's inevitable for them to compare the outcome of the computer to a potential outcome of an equivalent person trying to do similar things. You always try to think whether this could be done by humans, or whether there's a difference between what the computers comes out with to what humans would. So for me, this is a way to put a mirror in front of people, in front of humanity, even if this mirror is broken, or if it does not reflect what humans think or feel. it is a way to think from a different perspective or from a distance about what it means for us to be human. Now, the other question that people ask is, how do I do it, and what's the philosophy behind that? So there are a couple of ways to generate poems by computers. I'm not going to get into technical details. I'll just say that there are basically two methods. One of them is having a templates of sentences like noun, verb, noun, or something like that, and then populate those templates using a set of words or other elements of the language. The other method of generating text is doing it statistically, and in the last couple of years it became very, very popular to use machine learning, which means that we don't supply the computer with rules, with domain-specific rules, it's called, but rather we give them data and have the computers use this data, those examples we give it, to replicate their behavior and generate things that are similar to this behavior. So in this case, we're giving a lot of text, like the Eurovision. In the Eurovision case, we gave a lot of text of Eurovision songs, and we put it into a model, and we let the model train on them, learn them, and then it tries to generate something that behaves similarly to the inputs. That's the idea. And the philosophical thing that I like about it is that we think of it not as a creation out of nothing. It's not that there was a computer and it suddenly knew things. No, it's creation out of something. And this is kind of a postmodern principle, I guess, where we can think of the world of not just people, usually white male people, thinking of what's good, but we're not reinventing the wheel. We know what they've done, we know what's bad about it, and we're moving from that point onwards. So philosophically, it's a way that lets you deal with the situation, even if it's a bad situation or a wrong situation, by moving on and not by trying to create from zero. But for me, it was interesting because this is something that people kind of sometimes don't think about it, and when they realize that they're in a situation where it's creating out of nothing or not, it's becoming interesting for them. So I thought of taking the example of the thing that sounds the most like something that starts out of nothing, and I tried to see how it can look by recreating it out of something. I read the book, I saw the movie The Absent God by Yoram Ron about philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. And he speaks there about the Bible, and he says, you choose the sense with the letter that is still there and yet to come. He speaks about the traces of the biblical texts. In this sense, there is still a lot to be found in this trace today. So the thing that I thought about was, how can we rebuild the Bible, not from scratch, but by using technology? And this is how I came up with the book Code, which is a book not even in Hebrew, it's in biblical Hebrew. And the idea was to create a software that will go over the Torah, the 5 books of Moses in the Bible, and extract from these texts only the places in which the text forms a haiku. Haiku is a Japanese form of poetry where you have 5 syllables followed by 7 syllables followed by 5 syllables. And the idea was to find quotes from the Bible that obey or adhere to this structure without breaking the words. And this is the beginning of Code, my book, with the beginning of my version of the Torah. So it goes like this: abyss and spirit, God, she's floating upon the face of waters. This is a translation from biblical Hebrew, but it's the same syllable count and the same meaning. Floating upon the face of the waters, and so said God, let there be. Let there be a sky inside the waters, and let it divide waters. It that is the sky shall separate the waters that are underneath. Those are the waters that are underneath the sky and between waters. So the idea was to rewrite the Torah. Of course, if I had done it manually, it would have taken me thousands of years, but the software can do that really easily. So it managed to create something that humans would find hard to do, and it generated a new text that has a lot of traces to the original text. You can kind of try to read between the lines the original text through this text, and on the other hand, it's an independent creation that follows structure and not content. But there are a lot of places that, because of dealing with a kind of big amount of data, some places are just gibberish, but some places just have meaning inside them. For instance, there's the story of the binding of Isaac when Abraham wanted to sacrifice his son to God, and there's this dialogue that formed haiku form. So Isaac is talking to Abraham, and then Abraham answers. So it goes like this: Isaac, he said, my father. He said, Abraham, I am here, my son. Isaac, he said, there it is. So there's an entire Zen story inside this single haiku. And there are several interesting examples where a political change happens just by breaking the lines in the form of the book. And for this, you have to understand a little bit of Hebrew, because the Bible is written in biblical Hebrew, but I speak, my first language is contemporary Hebrew, and the same sentence, meta sfatayam, when it's written in a sentence, the biblical version says something about Egypt, then Israel beheld the Egyptians die on the seashore. So in this case, the Israelis ran away and the Egyptians died. But if you read the cut out version, which in the modern Hebrew, it goes like this: Egypt, Israel beheld the Egyptians, mad about the beach, which is much better for the Egyptians at least, but I think for everyone. It was nice that the circle was closed when those haiku verses were translated into Japanese. And I try to examine. I try to examine this idea of creating something from nothing using machine learning, and I tried to do it in a different project called I Love the Look of Words. It's a collaboration with Maya Morom, and part of it is still a work in progress. And what we did there is take a lot of words, create an images of them, feed it as examples to the machine learning, and try to generate things that look like words but are not necessarily words, because they just resemble the graphical representations of words. So you can see some here, and it's interesting if you take several groups of words and interesting things come out, but I won't be speaking a lot about this project for now. I don't know how much time I have, probably not a lot, so I'll speak briefly about two other projects. One of them is called the Electronic Curator that I did with Eyal Grus, and the thing about this project is that usually we think about computers in terms of generating content, but not in terms of curating it. We know that computers can generate everything, but the question is whether this generated poem or artwork is good enough. And the capability to evaluate such works is something that we know that computers are not good at this point of time, but we sometimes find it hard to imagine that they will have some capability in the future to do that, and we tried to do something like that. So what we did in this project was take pictures by using a webcam and turn them into portraits made out of fruits and vegetables. And the way we did it was using two neural networks, two machine learning entities, and something called generative adversarial network, where one part of the network is the painter, and the other part is the curator saying, this is not good, this is good, to the painter, so the painter has to improve, and the curator is getting better results all the time, so the curator has to improve in order to be finer in its decisions. So in this way, they are trained together, and this was used to generate the artworks, the portraits, and in addition, the curator generated a curatorial statement saying capitalism is about this and that, and we use the colors to portray this and that, and so on. So yeah, we direct our minds to think that technology is for us to behold, but as a matter of fact, the computer is the owner of the gaze, and maybe the computer's world is filled with other images and similes and so on. And I'll conclude by showing you my latest book, Half Reading, which is a book of augmented poetry, which means that half of the book is written on text, and to read the other part of each poem, you have to go to a website using your computer or phone and direct the phone over this sign, and only then the other part shows. Let's see an example. A cloud above a representation of a cloud in a book. A book in front of a representation of a book in the cloud. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer, and I'm still here. These are my details.
Hello, my name is Tim, and I'm 28, and I live in White River Junction, Vermont. My question to you is, how, if I'm not a coder, can I use artificial intelligence at home?
That's a great question, Tim. Thank you. I think that there's, first of all, a political aspect to this question, because I wouldn't like to be a poet that uses only tools or data that Google has and that people at home cannot access. So they have what they call big data, and I like to work with small data, like the lyrics to the Eurovision songs that you can find online, for instance. But today there are online tools that you can use in order to generate text, for instance. Like everything is online in some way. So let's try to have an AI ask a question. Let's use the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence GPT-2 Explorer. And I wrote it. My question to you is, and we see it wants us to add what is the best way 2, get, up, most, out, up, over. Yeah. Okay, what is the best way to get the most out of your time in the classroom? And the answer is obviously write poetry or use artificial intelligence to generate it. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm from White River Junction. I'm 33 years old. My question is there an advantage to the English language in artificial intelligence? And if so, what are the implications?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karen. The English language is the language where most of the high-tech industry in the world has gained its popularity. And as a result, a lot of the development, the QA, and the data, obviously, is generated in English. So most of the AI software, at least at the beginning, used the English language as an example. And when Google, for instance, began their translation engine using artificial intelligence, they translated from English to other languages. So it's quite central, and it's at the center of both humans and data. So it does have an advantage, because when you use data in English, you have a lot. You have larger quantities of data than if you use Danish or Hebrew, which has less than 15 million speakers. Yes, in English you've got hundreds of millions, and same for Spanish or Chinese or other languages. And as a result, there's a bias, just like there are a lot of other data biases. You can see that you can learn less from inferring conclusions from data in Hebrew, for instance, than from data in English. And there are a lot of algorithms that depend on the examples. You get to edge cases and you overcome them better when you have more data than in languages that don't have enough data. That is a problem, and I know that there are a lot of attempts to face those problems, those biases, and the lack of data instances in specific cases. For instance, if you need a lot of words in a language that do not exist in the databases, you can use automatic AI translation algorithms to recreate the missing data. So artificial intelligence does create a social difference, and it creates, in a sense, social classes and a social bias against specific languages, but it can also be the tool to minimize the difference and to resolve the biases. It is important to think, and with this I'll conclude, that it's the responsibility of the people who handle the data. Data by itself is not the problem. The problem is the people that use the data and create those biases. And it's the responsible of the people who create computer systems that use artificial intelligence to take into account that their data is not sterile, and it can create problems, and it's their role to face those problems as they built the systems, and not only see the problems when they are running and the problems are already there. Thank you for the questions. And thank you for being here. I'm still around if you need me. Thank you, Chico. Thank you, CATV.